Hey, welcome back to the Weekly Word Outdoor Adventures. Outdoor adventures. I'm sitting indoors, but we're getting ready to take you on a really adventurous outdoor trip. This is a Weekly Word Outdoor Adventure that I guarantee you that I will remember the rest of my life. I hope you enjoy it too. How we found the lost Guerin Spring. Napoleon Guerin was the manager at the Dutch settlement, and an old mountain man had told a friend of mine, he's a generation or so, I guess maybe before him, general directions to the spring from the Guerin home place, which if you missed that one, it's been 2 or 3 weeks back on the Weekly Word, where we went to the Guerin home place that was built in 1846. And of course, 1852, I think it was, Rosine Parmenter came down from New York and spent 3 weeks there and kept a diary that the Cleveland Daily Banner back then published, so we have that record. And Rosine had written a couple things about the spring in there, and that helped us find it too. But an old mountain man had told a friend of mine decades ago about he had found that spring, and it was always stayed covered up with the leaves and the duff that covered it up over the years. But if you could find it and open it up, it's supposed to be a 2x2 gray slate rock cover on it, and underneath that, when you pick it off, was supposed to be all this hand-laid square stone that had squared out a hole in the ground and made a spring box there with a little entrance coming in, a little entrance coming out. And a friend of mine, he found this in 1996, he said. He went back in there in 2011 and he couldn't find it. And he actually said that back then that he thought it had been destroyed by the hogs. But as time went by, he realized he was looking in the wrong place, and his memory came back to him. He's 20 years or so older than I am. And he told me the same directions that mountain man had given him years ago. So it was just very general from the house. But we knew from Rosine's diary that it was probably a good ways from the house, because she wrote one day it rained all day and they weren't able to go to the spring. And we went in there with these general directions, and Ken and I started looking around, and there was snow on the ground. We had the theory that with a little skiff of snow on the ground, is about an inch or two, that maybe after 2 or 3 days, the spring box would have been warm enough to melt the snow off and we could find it that way. But it didn't work because it had been so long since it had been opened up. The duff was over it so high it was insulated and the snow was still there. But we got in there, looked around for about half an hour. And by the time we'd hiked all those miles in there and looked around for a half hour, it was lunchtime. We sat down on the log and had lunch. Got up and started looking again, and I silently prayed. I said, Lord, we're not going to find this thing. It's like a needle in a haystack. If we find it, you're going to have to lead us to it, and it's going to be pure grace. And after about a half hour searching again, Ken yelled at me, and he said, I found something interesting. So I went over to where he was, and there was a place where there was no snow, about 6 by 8 wide, and what it was a seep of warm water coming out of the ground. And we looked at that for a minute, and then I looked up above it as the mountain began to rise, and about 10 feet up, I noticed it looked flat, like maybe years ago something had been dug. And then I remembered that Rosine had written in her diary back then that Mr. Napoleon Guerin had I think she called it a hut over his spring. So I thought that makes sense. It'd be a flat place, and the hut would have been over it at that time. So we scrambled up the mountain. I took my Pulaski and I began to rake off there, and the first time it hit the ground, it sounded hollow. And I began to scratch it off there, and I got down to a rock, and I pulled that rock out, and I realized it was a broken piece of that 2x2 piece of slate rock that was supposed to have been covering it the last time my friend had seen it. And a pine tree had fallen and hit right on it. It's probably what broke the rock in 3 pieces, but it was still intact, covering the spring under the soil. And we took the Pulaski, chopped the pine tree off, and threw it aside, and I uncovered the rest of it and started pulling the rock out, and there it was, just as pretty as it could be, just like it was 1846 again when it was laid in there, that rock by Mr. Guerin. So I'm going to take you on this adventure. I was so excited that I didn't even take time to get mic'd up, so the audio's not all that great, but I think you can still pick up all the excitement and adrenaline while we're uncovering this spring, and we actually get the camera and get some shots down inside of it for you too. So take a look at this, and I hope you enjoy it. Now I'll probably have to get my phone out and read the video. Across the ford to the right in the flat area. All right, we've been on a mission to see if we could find the Guerin spring that hasn't been uncovered in decades, that Mr. Guerin would have put rocks down in it, and according to Rosine Parmiter's diary in 1850s, there was a hut built over it. We're out here in the snow, and we found a flat area, and down below a little bit is a little bit of a seep. So we started probing and digging around a little bit here, and we uncovered this big flat rock that we've been told it was covered with a flat rock. That may just be part of it. I see another one standing on its end. That could have been all one rock at one time. About 2 by 2 is what I'd seen. And down in here you can see the rock, I believe hand laid in there. About a 4 by 4 entry of water coming in, and a 4 by 4 that they left going out. This big tree's falling right over the top of it, and that may be what broke the rock in half, because when I uncovered the leaves, there's like 2 pieces of it. It's supposed to have been a 2 by 2 rock covering it up, and one of them was still up here and the other one's down in there on its side. But I'm gonna see if I can drag this tree back, and we'll see if we can get the camera and get some footage down inside the spring box here. All right.
Oh, you got that now. Through that heartwood. Oh, there you go. Oh, it's been the stacked in rock around the spring.
There is the rest of the rock.
Wow. How about that?
2 by 2 is pretty close.
Yeah. Wow, yeah, it's got a good flow in there.
Clean that little stuff I knocked in here. That's enough to pull out.
Yeah.
And down in here you can see the rock, I believe hand laid in there. About a 4 by 4 entry of water coming in, and a 4 by 4 that they left going out. I'm drunk out of the Guerin spring.
Yeah, you have, haven't you? Here's a bigger one too. Yeah, how about that?
All right, I hope you enjoyed that, and hope you could pick up all the excitement and pleasure that we had when I was uncovering that. It was just like adrenaline was sky high for me. And I hope you picked it up, because I really can't describe the joy that I had in finding that lost spring. And of course, when we got done with it, we closed everything back up and covered everything back up where it can sleep for a few more decades now. But I got to thinking about that later, how just an overwhelming joy I found of finding that which had been lost for all these years. And I thought, I wonder if the Lord had as much joy when he found me when I was lost, because the Bible says, you know, there's joy in the presence of the angels in heaven over one sinner that gets saved. Not necessarily the angels are rejoicing, although I'm sure they are too, but I know the redeemed are, because they know what it's like to be lost. But I know the Lord has pleasure in those that come to Him and trust in Him too. And He'll have that same kind of pleasure, and all of heaven will. If you're lost and you just come to the Lord and say, Lord, here I am. I'm trusting in you. Forgive me for all my sins and help me to follow you. And there'll be joy in heaven, but you'll find out there'll be that kind of joy in your heart too, and peace, knowing that you belong to God and that you're forgiven. See you next week on the Weekly Word.